Almost everything you do in Illustrator involves selecting shapes and paths in order to change your content. In this tutorial, we're going to look at the two most basic tools you use for selecting content, and we're also going to look at a couple more advanced methods for more complicated documents. So, the very first thing in order to select content in Illustrator is selecting it from your artboard. Here we have a blue square that we've created, and I'm on this tool, the selection tool or black arrow, which is your most basic selection tool. I can select things by clicking on it, and now you can see it's selected because it has a blue outline and these points around it indicate it's selected. If I click off of it, it is no longer selected. I can also select it by using my selection tool and drawing a box around things. It is now selected again. My selection tool does a lot of the most basic moves, like moving shapes around. This is just by clicking down and dragging. And it also helps me adjust shapes. If ever I hover over one of these points, I can change the shape around. Similarly, on the corners, I can get this double-edged arrow and I can change content. If I hold down Shift, it will change proportionally, which is an important thing for resizing. And if I select it and hover over a corner slightly on the outside, I get this curved arrow, and this is where I can rotate content. If I hold down Shift while rotating, it turns things at perfect 45 degrees. I can also use these points inside to create rounded rectangles. The other most basic tool for selection is the direct selection tool. This differs from the main selection tool in that you can select points and individual parts of things rather than the whole object. So if I switch to my selection tool, I can now select this single point, and you can tell that these other points are hollow and they are not selected. I can now adjust this point independent of the rest of the shape. As soon as I have a point selected with my direct selection tool, I also get this anchor point menu up in the top left. And this is where I can change content into curves, which is a good way for creating smooth content in Illustrator. Once it's a curve, I get these handles, and I can use that to manipulate that shape further. I can do that again with as many points as I want. And if I decide I no longer want a curve point, I can click back on this corner point and turn it back to the way it was. With my direct selection tool, I can also select multiple points at once by holding down Shift, and now I can move multiple points independent of the rest of the shape. But what happens if you have multiple shapes on your same artboard? In this next example, we have our same blue square, and we also have a purple square and a blue rounded rectangle. Now, if I want to select all these things at once using my selection tool, I can hold down Shift in order to select them, and I can also draw around them using my tool, and they're all selected. I can also use my direct selection tool to select points of things in different shapes. So if I wanted to change these 2 points separately, I hold down Shift, I can select them both, and now I can move those points independent of the rest of their shapes. I can also use my selection tool with multiple things selected to scale, and this is where it's important to hit Shift to keep things scaling proportionally. Another way to select content when you have multiple things on one artboard is with your layers panel. Over here in my layers panel, I can see that I have a different little shape for each of the components on my artboard, and if I click on the blue square, you can tell it's selected in the layers panel because it gets this little square filled in next to it. I can also use that as a way to select other content. If I hold down Shift while I select the purple square, now both shapes are selected on my artboard. If I want to select everything in this layer, I can click on this layer button, and now everything in that layer is selected. But if I want to select everything, there are a couple other ways to do that, and now we're moving on to a few more complicated options up in the selection option in your top menu. First of all, you can select all, which also has the very easy keyboard shortcut of Control or Command A. But you can also select things in a more fine-tuned way. So if I have this blue square selected, I can go up to Select, Same, and it will let me choose based on attributes to select similar content. I can do Same Fill Color, and now it will only select the two items that have the same color. If you look under that Select menu, Same has a lot of different things. Appearance has to do with effects, fill and stroke, opacity, stroke weight, and shape. If I had a mix of circles and squares, I could select by shape and only get one or the other. To show you more about how those more complicated options work, here is a much more complicated document, which is a map of the Pullman campus for Washington State University. And I got this from a PDF, which is usually made out of vector graphics, but it's not very organized, and it's also not the colors I want. So here's how I can adjust something this complicated really quickly. If I click on this yellow area, you can tell that this doesn't even encompass all of the yellow on this map. But it would be really tedious and easy to miss something if I tried to just hold down Shift and select all the yellow areas on here. So instead, I can go up to, with one yellow area selected, go to Select, Same, Fill Color, and now I have everything yellow selected. I can tell that it did it properly because it shows yellow over here in my Properties panel. And now I could pick any other color that I want. Maybe I want this to be more of a pale green color. And again, maybe I decide that I don't want the roads to be such a light color. I can go to Select, Same, Fill and Stroke, and give those more of a dark green color. You can use those selection options in the menu for more than just shapes. In this document, all my text has kind of a funny pink outline on it, and that's because I don't have the font that this document started with. But instead of clicking around on every individual text label, which would take a really long time, I can select them all at once by going to Select, Object, All Text Objects, and now every piece of text in my document is selected, and I can choose a new font that's something that I do have on my computer. Now they've changed all at once, which saved a lot of time. Similarly, if I thought these outlines were too narrow, I can select all the content that has the same stroke weight, and I can give them a thicker stroke all at once. Those are a few ways that you can use the more complicated ways of selecting content, and you can also see that all those components, even in this very complicated document, are also selectable from the Layers panel, which is another way that you can always select content if you are having trouble at identifying different parts of a document.